On the evening of June 8, 2006, in Hilo, Hawaii, Leilani Akana, a 32-year-old marine biologist, returned to her beachside cottage after a long day cataloguing coral samples. The next morning, her sister arrived with coffee to find the door slightly open, curtains billowing in the ocean breeze, and Leilani lying motionless on the floor. Police collected blood, fibers and footprint evidence, but identified no suspect. A strange DNA sample was discovered, but it matched no profiles in CODIS. The prosecutor warned this might become a cold case. Leilani's family demanded answers. Neighbors placed flower leis in remembrance. Her young son grew up believing his mother was claimed by an invisible killer. Then in 2019, Hawaii began implementing forensic genealogy. A determined detective traced that DNA and uncovered surprising connections in an extended family tree. A name gradually emerged: Kai Nakamura, a well-known surfing instructor in Hilo. Once admired for his friendly demeanor with tourists, he now faced exposure. As police discreetly collected a water bottle and cigarette from his trash, the truth began to unravel. DNA never lies, and a secret hidden for 13 years finally started to crack. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the evening of June 8, 2006, Hilo, Hawaii was wrapped in a blanket of warm, tropical air. Palm trees swayed gently against the darkening sky, their silhouettes dancing in the fading light. Waves crashed rhythmically against the black sand beaches that lined parts of the Big Island's eastern coast, a natural lullaby for the small oceanfront community of Keaukaha. In a modest cottage just steps from the sea, Leilani Akana, 32, had just finished unpacking her research equipment. A respected marine biologist with the Pacific Ocean Research Center, her days were spent studying the increasingly endangered coral reefs surrounding the island. A single mother to a 4-year-old boy, she balanced her passion for ocean conservation with the deep love for her son, always finding time to share the wonders of the sea with him during their weekend beach explorations. That night, no one knew what transpired after Leilani closed her door, leaving only the sounds of gentle waves and distant nightbirds. The next morning, Malia Kealoha, Leilani's older sister, arrived as she often did, carrying 2 cups of freshly brewed Kona coffee and malasadas from their favorite bakery. She knocked several times but received no answer. Finding the door unlocked and slightly ajar, she felt a chill despite the warm Hawaiian morning. "Leilani?" she called out, stepping cautiously into the living room. Tropical sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, illuminating the small space where a research notebook lay open on the coffee table. Everything looked normal except for the unusual silence. No music playing, no sounds of morning routine, just the distant sound of waves and the occasional call of a seabird. Moving toward the bedroom, Malia felt her heart begin to race. "Lei, are you still sleeping?" The door was partially open, and as she pushed it wider, the coffee cup slipped from her hands, hot liquid splashing across the wooden floor. There on the bedroom floor lay Leilani, motionless, her dark hair spread around her like a halo against the light-colored bamboo flooring. Her eyes were half open, fixed in a vacant stare that immediately told Malia something was terribly wrong. The bedroom showed clear signs of a struggle: a knocked-over lamp, scattered papers, a chair pushed awkwardly against the wall. Marks on Leilani's neck and wrists painted the picture of someone who had fought desperately for her life. In the small room adjacent, her 4-year-old son Keone slept peacefully, unaware that his mother would never again wake him with gentle kisses and stories of sea turtles and colorful fish. With trembling hands, Malia dialed 911, her voice breaking as she struggled to explain what she had found. Within minutes, patrol cars from the Hawaii County Police Department arrived, their blue lights flashing against the palm trees, drawing concerned looks from neighbors gathering on the narrow street. Officers quickly secured the scene, establishing a perimeter with yellow tape that fluttered in the sea breeze. Sergeant David Maho, a veteran officer with deep ties to the island community, surveyed the cottage with a grim expression. "This is a homicide," he quietly told his team. "Call in forensics and make sure the child is taken care of." For Keaukaha and the greater Hilo area, a close-knit community where many residents recognized each other at the farmers' market or from outrigger canoe racing events, a brutal murder was almost unthinkable. This quiet stretch of the island, where generations had lived in harmony with the sea, suddenly felt exposed and vulnerable. The distant wail of additional sirens cut through the usual morning sounds of birds and waves, signaling that the peace of this paradise had been shattered in a single night. As the Hawaii County forensic team arrived, technicians in white protective suits carefully examined every inch of Leilani's cottage. They photographed footprints in the sandy soil leading to the back door, collected fibers from the bedroom carpet, and took samples of blood droplets found on the sheets. Every detail was documented. The angle of overturned furniture, the pattern of struggle evident in scuff marks on the floor, even the position of Leilani's body, which suggested she had been attacked from behind. The team worked methodically, knowing that evidence deteriorates quickly in Hawaii's warm, humid climate. A technician carefully lifted several dark hairs from the pillow with tweezers, placing them in a sealed evidence bag. Another swabbed a small smear of blood from the doorframe, blood that didn't appear to match the victim's wounds, suggesting the attacker might have been injured during the struggle. Outside, curious and frightened neighbors gathered beyond the police tape. "I've never seen anything like this in Keaukaha," whispered an elderly woman who had lived in the area for decades. A young father held his child close, eyes wide with concern. Leilani was always helping with beach cleanups. Who would want to hurt her? By midday, local news crews had arrived, setting up cameras across the street. The headline, "Hilo Woman Found Dead in Home," soon spread across the island, sending shockwaves through communities from Kailua Kona to Pahoa. The Big Island, known for its laid-back lifestyle and relative safety, now faced the reality that a killer walked among them. Back at the police station, Detective Nathan Kamaka took charge of the investigation. A seasoned detective who had returned to his home island after years with the Honolulu Police Department, Kamaka knew that the first 48 hours were critical. He immediately began compiling a list of people close to Leilani, her ex-husband, colleagues, neighbors, and anyone who might have had reason to harm her. Marcus Akana, Leilani's ex-husband and father to their son, was the first to be questioned. Still visibly shaken from the news, he sat in the interrogation room, hands trembling. "We had our differences during the divorce," he admitted, "but we were making it work for Keone. I would never hurt her." Though their separation had been contentious, with custody disputes that reached the courts, Marcus had an alibi for the night of June 8th. Security cameras at the hotel where he worked as a manager showed him on duty until midnight, and co-workers confirmed his presence. Next came Dr. James Kwan, Leilani's research partner and director of the marine biology program. Their relationship had been purely professional, but rumors of tension over research funding had reached the police. Dr. Kwan appeared genuinely devastated. "Leilani was brilliant," he said, voice cracking. "Her work on coral bleaching was groundbreaking. We were close to a major publication. His whereabouts were confirmed by his wife and teenage children. He had been home all evening helping his daughter with college applications." Detective Kamaka then turned to Leilani's neighbors. Several reported seeing her return home around 6:30 p.m., carrying her research equipment. None had noticed any unusual visitors or sounds during the night. However, one elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kalani, mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car parked down the street, dark blue, maybe a Toyota, but couldn't recall the time or any other details. As days passed, the investigation widened. Leilani's phone records showed her last call was to her sister at 8:15 p.m., discussing plans to take Keone to a tide pool excursion that weekend. Her final text message sent at 9:02 p.m. to a colleague simply read, "Finalize the data tables. All set for tomorrow's presentation. Keone's asleep early for once. Finally some quiet time." That message became the last known communication from Leilani Akana Based on the forensic evidence, the medical examiner estimated her death occurred between 10 p.m. and midnight, a window of time in which the killer entered her life and extinguished it, leaving behind only scientific evidence and a community gripped by fear. 1 week into the investigation, the Hawaii County Forensics team delivered a crucial finding. Among the evidence collected from Leilani's cottage, they had isolated DNA that didn't match the victim or any known relatives. This foreign DNA, found both under the victim's fingernails and on her neck, suggested she had scratched her attacker during the struggle. The sample was immediately sent to the State Crime Lab in Honolulu for analysis and comparison with the CODIS database. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At the Hawaii State Crime Laboratory in Honolulu, Dr. Lisa Wong, the chief forensic analyst, personally oversaw the processing of evidence from the Akana case. The DNA sample was carefully extracted, amplified, and analyzed, producing a genetic profile that would be compared against thousands of known offenders in the database. 3 days later, Dr. Wong called Detective Kamaka with disappointing news. "The DNA doesn't match anyone in CODIS," she reported. "Whoever left this DNA has never been arrested for a felony or otherwise had their profile entered into the system." While the lack of a match was a setback, the DNA evidence remained their most valuable asset. It was preserved with extreme care, properly stored to prevent degradation. "Keep this sample secure," Kamaka instructed the lab. "Someday, this DNA might be the key that unlocks this whole case." With the DNA lead temporarily stalled, the investigation turned to other angles. Detectives thoroughly examined Leilani's personal and professional life, seeking any connection that might lead to her killer. They discovered that 2 weeks before her death, Leilani had reported suspicious activity to a colleague. She believed someone had been watching her during her research dives near Coconut Island. She had dismissed it as probably being curious tourists, but in light of her murder, this detail took on new significance. The police interviewed every dive instructor, boat operator, and regular beachgoer in the area, creating a list of individuals who frequently accessed the beaches and reefs where Leilani conducted her research. This generated dozens of potential persons of interest, but without more evidence, none could be conclusively tied to the crime. By the 4th week of investigation, media interest began to wane. Headlines that once dominated the front page moved to smaller spaces inside local newspapers. The initial shock that had paralyzed the community started to fade into a lingering unease. For the investigators, however, the case remained active, files growing thicker with interview transcripts and follow-up reports that led to more questions than answers. During this time, Leilani's family struggled with their new reality. Malia took custody of young Keone, who would wake at night calling for his mother. Marcus, despite the initial suspicion, became a regular presence, helping his son navigate a world suddenly without his mother. Leilani's parents, longtime Hilo residents respected in the Hawaiian community, organized weekly beach cleanups in their daughter's memory, channeling their grief into continuing her environmental work. In early August 2006, nearly 2 months after the murder, the case hit its first major roadblock. With no matches in CODIS, no witnesses to the crime, and no clear motive established, Detective Kamaka faced the possibility that the Akana case might go cold. In his office, surrounded by photos of the crime scene and timelines pinned to bulletin boards, he struggled with the thought of telling Leilani's family that answers might not come quickly. County Prosecutor Michael Hara confirmed Kamaka's fears during a private meeting. "Without more concrete evidence linking someone to the scene, we don't have enough for charges, even if you find a suspect," Hara explained. "The DNA is critical, but without a match, it's just a genetic fingerprint without an owner." On a rainy evening in September 2006, Kamaka met with the Akana family at their home. Sitting in their living room, surrounded by photos of Leilani throughout her life, graduating with honors, holding baby Keone, diving among colorful coral reefs. He delivered the difficult news. "We haven't given up," he assured them, "but I want to be honest. Without new evidence or information, the case may remain unsolved for some time." The words hung heavy in the air, met with silent tears from Leilani's mother and a hard stare from her father. "What about the DNA?" Malia asked, her voice steady despite her grief. "You said it was clear evidence." "It is," Kamaka confirmed, "and we've preserved it carefully. Science advances every year. Someday that DNA might lead us directly to the killer. I promise you, this case will never be forgotten." As the rainy season intensified, the investigation continued, but at a slower pace. New leads became scarce, and other cases demanded attention. The Akana murder file remained open, but was gradually moved to a cabinet with other unsolved cases. Detective Kamaka kept a photo of Leilani and Keone on his desk, a personal reminder of unfinished business. In the community, fear gradually gave way to caution. Residents installed better locks, established neighborhood watch programs, and adopted a general wariness that had been uncommon on the friendly island. Parents were more protective of their children, and women were advised not to go to remote beaches alone. The invisible threat of an unidentified killer had changed the fabric of daily life in Hilo. As 2006 drew to a close, the annual memorial service for Leilani at Richardson Beach Park drew hundreds of attendees. Tiki torches illuminated the gathering as the sun set over the Pacific. Leilani's colleagues spoke of her contributions to marine conservation. Friends shared stories of her kindness and infectious laugh. Keone, now 5, released a small boat made of palm leaves filled with flowers into the ocean, a traditional Hawaiian tribute to those who have passed. Detective Kamaka stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the families surrounded by community support. He knew that while life continued and wounds began to heal, justice remained elusive. As darkness fell and stars appeared over the Pacific, he made a silent vow to the memory of Leilani Akana, that someday, no matter how long it took, the truth would surface like a diver emerging from the depths. When the Akana case officially became classified as cold in early 2007, it joined dozens of other unsolved murders in Hawaii County's archives. The thick file, containing hundreds of pages of witness statements, forensic reports, and photographs, was stored in a temperature-controlled room to preserve the evidence. The DNA sample, still the most promising lead, remained securely frozen at the state lab, waiting for the day when technology might reveal its secrets. For years, Detective Kamaka would occasionally revisit the file, reviewing details and hoping for a new perspective. Sometimes he would drive past Leilani's former cottage, now occupied by a new tenant, and wonder about the clues he might have missed. But with no new evidence and other pressing cases demanding attention, the investigation stalled in the limbo of unsolved crimes. The years passed, marked by annual remembrances for Leilani. Her son Keone grew from a confused child into a teenager with only fading memories of his mother, supplemented by the stories relatives would share. He inherited her love for the ocean, becoming an accomplished junior surfer and developing an interest in marine biology that both honored his mother and offered a connection to her. By 2012, 6 years after the murder, the case had receded from public memory. Occasionally, local news would run anniversary pieces, but without developments, these became shorter and less prominent each year. For many in Hilo, the Akana murder became a tragic footnote in the community's history, remembered but unresolved. But for Leilani's family, the wound remained open. Her father, once a jovial tour boat captain, grew quieter and more withdrawn. Her mother channeled her grief into advocacy, establishing the Leilani Akana Foundation for Marine Conservation and lobbying for better resources for law enforcement. Malia, while raising Keone alongside her own children, made it her mission to keep her sister's case from being forgotten entirely. In 2013, the Akana case saw a brief resurgence of interest, when a true crime podcast from Honolulu featured it in a series about unsolved Hawaiian murders. The podcast hosts interviewed Malia, Detective Kamaka, and several of Leilani's colleagues, compiling the most comprehensive public account of the case to date. The resulting three-part series, Paradise Lost, the Leilani Akana mystery, brought renewed attention to the investigation, generating tips from listeners across the islands. Most leads proved fruitless, distant memories, second-hand stories, or theories without evidence. However, one caller mentioned something that caught Detective Kamaka's attention. The anonymous tip described seeing a man arguing with Leilani at Coconut Island several weeks before her death. The caller hadn't come forward in 2006, believing it insignificant, but after hearing the podcast, reconsidered its importance. Kamaka tracked down the caller, a former tourboat operator named William Kanahele, who elaborated on his observation. "I saw Leilani packing up her research equipment when this guy approached her. At first, it seemed like casual conversation, but it quickly became heated. She kept shaking her head, and he got closer, too close, you know. Intimidating like. I was about to step in when she pointed at me and the guy backed off." When asked to describe the man, Kanahele provided only vague details. Local guy, athletic build, maybe early 30s, nothing distinctive enough to narrow the field of potential suspects. Still, it confirmed the theory that someone had been watching Leilani before her death, possibly stalking her research sites. The podcast-generated leads eventually dwindled, and the case once again receded from public attention. However, for Leilani's family, each passing anniversary deepened their resolve, rather than diminishing it. In 2016, marking 10 years since her death, they organized the largest memorial gathering yet at Richardson Beach Park. Under the glow of tiki torches, hundreds assembled to honor Leilani's memory. Keone, now 14, stood tall beside his grandparents, aunt and father. No longer the confused child who couldn't understand why his mother never returned, he had grown into a thoughtful teenager who channeled his loss into purpose. At the gathering, he announced the launch of the Leilani Akana Scholarship for young marine biology students, funded by the foundation his grandmother had established. "My mother loved these waters," Keone told the crowd, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "She believed in protecting them for future generations. I may not have her memories, but I have her mission." His words moved many to tears, including Detective Kamaka, who stood at the back of the gathering as he did each year. After the ceremony, Kamaka approached the family. Now nearing retirement, the unsolved case had become his greatest professional regret. "I want you to know," he told them quietly, "that your daughter's file is never far from my desk. Technology changes. People talk. Someday we'll find who did this." Malia, who had maintained regular contact with Kamaka over the years, pressed him. "Is there anything new? Anything at all?" The detective hesitated, then mentioned a developing technology called forensic genealogy that was beginning to solve cold cases on the mainland. "It's not available here yet," he explained, "but if it comes to Hawaii, the DNA we preserved could finally lead us to a name." For the first time in years, a flicker of hope appeared in the family's eyes, not just the comfort of remembrance, but the possibility of answers. In early 2017, Hawaii's law enforcement agencies faced growing pressure to adopt more advanced forensic techniques. Several high-profile cases on the mainland had been solved using genealogical DNA databases, most notably the arrest of the Golden State Killer after decades of evasion. Victims' families across the islands, including the Akanas, began lobbying state legislators to fund similar capabilities for Hawaii's crime labs. Dr. Lisa Wong, still serving as the state's chief forensic analyst, became a vocal advocate for bringing forensic genealogy to Hawaii. In testimony before the state Senate, she explained how the technique could transform cold case investigations across the islands. "We have preserved DNA from dozens of unsolved murders," she stated. "With this technology, we could finally put names to these samples and bring closure to grieving families." The legislative battle was lengthy, with concerns about privacy and cost competing against the potential for justice. By late 2018, funding was finally approved, and Dr. Wong began assembling a specialized team trained in the new methodology. The Akana case, with its well-preserved DNA sample and public support, was selected among the first 5 cold cases to undergo the new analysis. In January 2019, 13 years after Leilani's murder, her preserved DNA sample was carefully retrieved from storage. Using advanced extraction techniques unavailable in 2006, technicians obtained a more detailed genetic profile, which was then uploaded to public genealogical databases where individuals voluntarily shared their DNA for ancestry research. Unlike the limited CODIS system, which only contained profiles of convicted offenders, these public databases held millions of profiles from everyday people tracing their family histories. The goal wasn't to find the killer directly, but to identify relatives sharing genetic markers, creating a family tree that might eventually lead to the perpetrator. The first results came 6 weeks later. The analysis identified several distant cousins, third and fourth relatives, sharing small percentages of DNA with the unknown sample. None were suspects themselves, but they provided the first pieces of a complex genetic puzzle. Dr. Wong's team began the painstaking process of building family trees, tracking marriages, births, and migrations across generations. As the genealogical work continued behind the scenes, another significant development occurred in the Akana investigation. Detective Nathan Kamaka, after 33 years with the Hawaii County Police Department, announced his retirement. At his farewell gathering, surrounded by colleagues and family, he made a surprising announcement. "I'm not truly leaving," he told the assembled officers. "I've accepted a position as a cold case consultant, and my first priority will be the Akana murder." The room broke into applause. Everyone knew this case had defined the latter part of Kamaka's career, the one he couldn't let go. In his new role, Kamaka had greater flexibility to focus exclusively on the evidence. He revisited every witness, re-examined every statement, and spent hours studying the crime scene photographs, looking for details that might have been overlooked. Working closely with Dr. Wong's forensic genealogy team, he became the bridge between the original investigation and the new scientific approach. By mid-2019, the genealogical analysis had narrowed to 3 main family branches with connections to the Big Island. Dr. Wong's team identified a common ancestor, a Japanese-Hawaiian family that had lived in Hilo for 5 generations. From this ancestor, the family tree spread into dozens of branches, with hundreds of potential descendants living across the Hawaiian Islands. Kamaka focused his attention on male descendants between the ages of 25 and 45 at the time of the murder, who lived on the Big Island in 2006. This narrowed the field to 17 individuals. Cross-referencing with employment records, known locations, and possible connections to Leilani or her research sites further reduced the list to 8 persons of interest. Among these 8 names, one stood out: Kai Nakamura, 35. At the time of the murder, a surfing instructor who offered lessons and guided tours along the Hilo coastline, including areas where Leilani conducted her research. Nakamura had been briefly questioned in 2006 as part of the general canvass of people who frequented the beaches, but with no specific evidence linking him to Leilani. He hadn't been considered a serious suspect. Looking deeper into Nakamura's background, Kamaka discovered several concerning details that had been overlooked in the original investigation. 2 female tourists had filed complaints about Nakamura's inappropriate behavior during private surf lessons in 2005, though no charges were ever filed. Additionally, he had been cited for trespassing at a university marine research facility in 2004, claiming he had just been curious about the work being done there. Most significantly, Nakamura's surf school had operated near Coconut Island, where Leilani frequently conducted research, and where the witness had seen her arguing with an unidentified man weeks before her murder. The coincidence was too strong to ignore. With renewed focus, Kamaka began surveillance on Nakamura, now 48 and still operating his surf school in Hilo. Rather than approaching him directly, which might alert him to the investigation, Kamaka watched from a distance, building a profile of his daily habits, associates, and behaviors. The former detective observed a man well-liked in the community, charismatic with tourists, but who lived alone and kept largely to himself outside of work hours. To confirm whether Nakamura was indeed their suspect, they needed to match his DNA with the sample from the crime scene. However, obtaining a DNA sample required careful legal navigation. Without probable cause for a warrant, they needed to collect discarded DNA, items Nakamura had touched and abandoned in public spaces. For weeks, Kamaka and a small team conducted discreet surveillance, waiting for opportunities. They followed Nakamura to restaurants, watching as he used utensils and cups. They monitored his trash bins, looking for personal items he had discarded. The process was tedious and often fruitless. Samples were contaminated, degraded by humidity, or otherwise unusable. In September 2019, persistence finally paid off. After a surfing competition where Nakamura served as a judge, he discarded a water bottle in a public trash can. An undercover officer retrieved the bottle immediately, sealing it in an evidence bag. The same day, a cigarette butt Nakamura flicked onto the beach while packing his equipment was also collected. Both items were rushed to Dr. Wong's laboratory, where technicians extracted DNA samples and began the comparison process. The results would take days, during which Kamaka found himself unable to sleep, alternating between hope that they had finally found their killer and fear that they were pursuing yet another dead end. On September 24, 2019, Dr. Wong called Kamaka directly, her voice tense with the weight of her findings. "We have a match," she stated simply. The DNA from both the water bottle and cigarette butt matched the sample from Leilani Akana's case. The probability of error is less than 1 in a trillion. Kamaka sat in silence, absorbing the reality that after 13 years, they had finally put a name to the killer. "We've got him," he whispered, more to himself than to Dr. Wong. "We've finally got him." Before moving to arrest Nakamura, Kamaka and the county prosecutor built a comprehensive case. They needed to ensure that the DNA evidence was legally obtained and that all procedures had been meticulously followed. They also gathered supporting evidence, mapping Nakamura's known locations in 2006 against Leilani's research sites, interviewing former employees of his surf school who might have seen interactions between them, and building a psychological profile that supported the theory of obsession turned to violence. By early October 2019, an arrest warrant was issued for Kai Nakamura. Rather than a dramatic public confrontation, authorities planned a controlled arrest that would minimize the risk of flight or harm. On the morning of October 5th, as Nakamura arrived at Honoli Beach Park to set up his surf school for the day, 3 unmarked police vehicles quietly surrounded his truck. Detective Sergeant Elena Pukwi, who had inherited many of Kamaka's cases upon his retirement, approached with 4 officers. "Kai Nakamura," she announced formally, "you are under arrest for the murder of Leilani Akana." Nakamura froze, surfboard half unloaded from his truck, his face draining of color as the words registered. He offered no resistance as officers handcuffed him and read his rights. Word of the arrest spread rapidly through Hilo. By noon, local news crews were broadcasting live from outside the police station where Nakamura was being processed and interrogated. For many residents who had known him for years, rented surfboards from him, sent their children for lessons, recommended his services to tourists, the news was incomprehensible. "He was always so friendly, so easygoing," one longtime resident told reporters. "I never would have thought." Her voice trailed off, unable to reconcile the smiling surf instructor with the accused murderer. Others recalled Nakamura's quiet intensity, his occasional mood swings, or the way he sometimes stared too long at female customers. Behaviors that seemed merely odd before, but now took on sinister implications. For Leilani's family, the arrest brought a complex wave of emotions. Relief that justice was finally moving forward mingled with renewed grief as the wound of loss was reopened. Malia was the first family member to speak publicly, appearing briefly outside her home with Keone, now 17, at her side. "We thank the police and forensic teams who never gave up," she told the gathered reporters, her voice steady despite visible emotion. "We've waited 13 years to know who took Leilani from us. While this arrest doesn't bring her back, it begins the process of justice that has been too long delayed." In the interrogation room, Nakamura maintained a stoic silence, declining to answer questions without his attorney present. When legal representation arrived, he continued to proclaim his innocence, dismissing the DNA evidence as a mistake or contamination. However, as Detective Pukui and Kamaka, present as a consultant, laid out the scientific certainty of the match, cracks began to show in his composure. "I knew her, yes," Nakamura finally admitted, voice low. "She was always at the beaches where I taught. We talked sometimes about the reefs, the fish. That's all." When pressed about the argument witnessed at Coconut Island, he claimed it was a misunderstanding about his surf students disturbing her research sites. He offered no explanation for how his DNA came to be under her fingernails or on her neck. As the interrogation continued, a clearer picture began to emerge. Records showed that Nakamura had indeed been questioned in 2006 as part of the general canvass, but his name was just one among dozens of people who frequented the beach areas. Without the DNA match or clear motive, he hadn't stood out. Now, looking back at his original statement, investigators noted inconsistencies. His claim that he barely knew Leilani contradicted by evidence that he had approached her multiple times at her research sites. While Nakamura refused to confess, forensic evidence continued to build. Analysis of the original crime scene photos revealed a distinctive tread pattern on the sandy soil outside Leilani's cottage that matched a brand of surf booties Nakamura was known to wear. Re-examination of fibers collected in 2006 found similarities to the material used in rash guards typically worn by surfers for protection against sun and abrasion. As news of these developments reached the public, the community's shock transformed into outrage. How could a killer have lived among them for 13 years, building a successful business, interacting with tourists and locals alike, all while carrying such a dark secret? For some, the answer lay in the community's trusting nature, the aloha spirit that welcomed and accepted without question, perhaps sometimes to a fault. While Nakamura awaited trial in the Hawaii Community Correctional Center, the impact of his arrest rippled through Hilo and beyond. The case became a focal point for discussions about safety, justice, and the evolution of forensic science. Local news outlets ran features on how genealogical DNA had transformed cold case investigations, with the Akana case as the prime example. For Kamaka, the arrest brought a measure of professional closure. Though officially retired, he had fulfilled his promise to the Akana family and to himself. In a quiet moment after the arrest, he visited Leilani's memorial plaque at Richardson Beach Park, placing a lei of white plumeria blossoms beneath her name and photo. "We found him, Leilani," he murmured. "It took too long, but we found him." The Akana family prepared themselves for the trial that would follow, the painful excavation of memories, the clinical dissection of Leilani's final moments, and the public scrutiny that would accompany the proceedings. Yet despite the difficulty ahead, there was a sense of forward movement, of a journey nearing its end after 13 years of standing still. At a private family gathering the weekend after the arrest, Leilani's parents, sister, ex-husband and son stood together on the black sand beach, near where she had conducted much of her research. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting golden light across the waves, they released flower-laden canoe lanterns into the ocean, a traditional Hawaiian practice to honor those who have passed and guide their spirits home. Keone, now a young man preparing for college, with plans to study marine biology like his mother, waded deeper into the water than the others. The dying light caught the tears on his face as he watched the lanterns drift out to sea. "I was too young to remember her voice," he said softly to his aunt who stood nearby. "But now I'll know why she was taken from us. That's something, isn't it?" Malia placed an arm around her nephew's shoulders. "It's more than something," she assured him. "It's the truth. And your mother always believed that truth, however painful, was better than comforting uncertainty." As darkness fell and stars appeared above the Pacific, the family made their way back to shore, their silhouettes merging with the gathering shadows. Behind them, the lanterns continued their journey outward, tiny points of light against the vast ocean, like the small flame of justice that had finally, after 13 long years, illuminated the truth. The arrest of Kai Nakamura transformed the quiet coastal community of Kaukaha and Greater Hilo. Residents, who had known him for years, struggled to reconcile the friendly surf instructor with the accused murderer. Many expressed shock that someone capable of such violence had lived and worked among them, interacting daily with tourists and locals alike. Theories about Nakamura's motive spread quickly. The most consistent narrative, supported by evidence and witness statements, suggested an obsession that began when Nakamura encountered Leilani during her research dives. Her beauty, intelligence, and dedication had apparently triggered something dark in him, a desire to possess what he couldn't have through normal means. The trial of Kai Nakamura began in April 2020 at the Third Circuit Court in Hilo, drawing national media attention as one of Hawaii's most significant cold cases solved through forensic genealogy. The courthouse, a modern building with traditional Hawaiian architectural elements, was surrounded daily by news crews, curious onlookers, and supporters of the Akana family who held silent vigils outside. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, prosecutor Michael Hara presented the state's case methodically. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice resonating through the hushed room, "the defendant, Kai Nakamura, hid in plain sight for 13 years after brutally taking the life of Leilani Akana. Science has finally revealed what he tried so desperately to conceal." The prosecution's case centered on the DNA evidence, with Dr. Lisa Wong explaining in detailed yet accessible terms how the genetic material recovered from under Leilani's fingernails and on her neck matched Nakamura's profile with astronomical certainty. "The probability of this DNA belonging to someone other than the defendant is less than 1 in 1 trillion, she testified, her calm professionalism lending weight to the scientific evidence. Former Detective Nathan Kamaka, now serving as a consultant, took the stand to walk the jury through the original investigation and the breakthroughs made through forensic genealogy. Weathered but resolute, Kamaka described how advances in DNA technology had finally connected the evidence preserved in 2006 to Nakamura's family tree. "For 13 years, we had the killer's genetic fingerprint," Kamaka explained. "What we lacked was the name to match it. Forensic genealogy gave us that name, Kai Nakamura." As he spoke, Nakamura sat motionless at the defense table, eyes fixed on a notepad, refusing to meet the detective's gaze. The defense strategy became clear as attorney Daniel Matsumoto cross-examined the state's witnesses. Rather than directly challenging the DNA match, which was scientifically irrefutable, Matsumoto focused on potential procedural issues, questioning the chain of custody for evidence stored for over a decade and challenging the legal basis for using genealogical databases without a warrant. "While science may have advanced," Matsumoto argued, "our constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure remain constant. My client never consented to having his DNA compared against samples in recreational genealogy databases." Legal experts following the trial noted that this argument represented a novel challenge to forensic genealogy, potentially setting precedent for future cases. Judge Eleanor Kaimana considered the defense's motion to suppress the DNA evidence, but ultimately ruled it admissible. Finding that Nakamura had abandoned the items from which his DNA was collected, and therefore had no reasonable expectation of privacy. As the trial progressed, the prosecution built a narrative beyond the DNA evidence. They established Nakamura's presence near Leilani's research sites, presented testimony from William Kanahili about the argument he had witnessed at Coconut Island, and introduced evidence of Nakamura's prior inappropriate behavior toward women. Particularly damning was testimony from a former employee of Nakamura's surf school, Alana Kealoha, who recalled her boss's unusual interest in Leilani. "He would watch her when she was diving near our lesson area," Kealoha testified. "Sometimes he would cancel lessons if he saw her setting up her research equipment, saying he wanted to check the water conditions himself. He always came back agitated." The defense countered by portraying Nakamura as a respected business owner with deep ties to the community. Character witnesses described him as friendly, helpful, and passionate about the ocean. None could recall him expressing anger or aggression toward Leilani or anyone else. Matsumoto suggested that any interactions between Nakamura and Leilani were professional and related to shared interest in marine conservation. As the trial entered its third week, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Kai Nakamura took the stand in his own defense. Dressed in a pressed button-down shirt and slacks, he appeared calm and collected, maintaining eye contact with jurors as he answered his attorney's questions. Nakamura acknowledged knowing Leilani, but characterized their relationship as casual acquaintances who occasionally crossed paths due to their work in the same coastal areas. "We had professional discussions about the reefs, the fish populations, water quality, things that affected both her research and my surf lessons," he testified. There was never any personal relationship. When asked directly about the night of June 8, 2006, Nakamura claimed he had been hosting a bonfire with friends at Honolulu Beach, miles from Leilani's cottage. However, the prosecution quickly identified problems with this alibi. None of the friends he named could confirm his presence for the entire evening, and cell phone records placed his phone near Keaukaha, not Honolulu, during the critical hours. Under cross-examination by prosecutor Hara, Nakamura's composure began to crack. "Can you explain how your DNA came to be under Ms. Akana's fingernails?" Hara asked directly. "I cannot," Nakamura replied, shifting in his seat. "And can you explain how your DNA was found on her neck, consistent with the strangulation marks identified by the medical examiner?" "There must be a mistake in the testing," Nakamura insisted, voice rising slightly. "A mistake with a 1 in 1 trillion probability." Hara pressed, moving closer to the witness stand. "Or is it more likely that you became obsessed with Leilani Akana, that you followed her home that night, and when she rejected your advances, you killed her?" "Objection," Matsumoto called out. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Kaimana ruled, but the damage was done. Jurors had seen Nakamura's confident demeanor falter, replaced by visible discomfort and defensive responses. The most emotional testimony came from Leilani's family. Malia described finding her sister's body, breaking down several times as she recounted the morning that forever changed their lives. Leilani's mother spoke of 13 years of birthdays, holidays, and milestones her daughter never saw. The courtroom fell completely silent when Keone, now 18, took the stand. Tall and composed, with features reminiscent of his mother, Keone spoke of growing up without memories of the woman everyone said he resembled. "I know my mother through stories, through photographs, through the work she left behind," he said, voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "I spent my whole life wondering why someone would take her away from me. I deserve to know the truth." Throughout Keone's testimony, observers noted that Nakamura, for the first time, could not maintain his composure. He stared down at the table, occasionally wiping his eyes, unable to look at the young man whose mother he was accused of killing. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments captured the essence of the case. Defense attorney Matsumoto emphasized reasonable doubt, questioning procedural aspects of the investigation and suggesting alternative explanations for the DNA evidence. Science is not infallible, he reminded the jury, and justice requires more than probability, no matter how high. Prosecutor Hara stood before the jury one last time, his voice resonating with conviction. The evidence before you is not just about science, though the science is irrefutable. It's about a mother taken from her child, a brilliant researcher silenced, and a community that lived in fear while the killer walked freely among them. Guy Nakamura thought time would erase his crime. DNA ensured it did not. Justice for Leilani Akana is 13 years overdue. As the jury filed out for deliberations, the Akana family sat together in the front row, hands clasped in silent prayer. Nakamura remained at the defense table, seemingly diminished by the weight of evidence against him. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation about how long the jury would take to reach a verdict. Surprisingly, deliberations lasted less than 8 hours. When the jury returned the following morning, the courtroom fell silent as the foreman rose to deliver their decision. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Kai Nakamura, guilty. The single word, guilty, broke the tension like a thunderclap. Malia clasped her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Leilani's parents embraced, their shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Keone stood tall, his expression a complex mixture of relief and lingering sadness. Nakamura showed little reaction beyond a slight slump of his shoulders. As officers approached to take him into custody, he finally looked directly at the Akana family, his expression unreadable, before being led away to await sentencing. 2 weeks later, Judge Keimana delivered Nakamura's sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Addressing the court, she spoke of the heinous nature of the crime, the years of suffering inflicted on the victim's family, and the breach of community trust represented by Nakamura's actions. You took not only a life, but also the sense of safety and trust that defined this community, Judge Keimana told Nakamura. You will spend the rest of your days behind bars, which is the only measure of justice available to us, though it cannot truly compensate for what was lost. Given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Nakamura maintained his innocence, offering no apology or explanation to the family. His silence in the face of overwhelming evidence only reinforced the community's belief in his guilt and the justness of his sentence. Outside the courthouse, as rain fell softly on the gathered crowd, the Akana family addressed the media and supporters who had followed the case from its beginning to its conclusion. Gerald Akana, Leilani's father, spoke first, his voice steady despite years of grief. Today marks the end of a long journey for our family, he said. We have waited 13 years to know who took our daughter from us and why justice was so long in coming. While nothing can bring Leilani back to us, knowing her killer will never harm another family provides some measure of peace. Malia, who had been the driving force behind keeping the case alive, thanked the investigators, especially Nathan Kamaka, whose dedication had never wavered even in retirement. This case proves that justice may be delayed, but with persistence and advances in science, it cannot be denied forever. The most powerful statement came from Keone, standing tall beside his grandparents. My mother was taken before I could know her, but her legacy lives on in the work she did to protect Hawaii's coral reefs, in the foundation that bears her name, and in my own commitment to continue her research. Today is not just about punishment for a crime, but about honoring a life that mattered deeply to so many. As the family concluded their remarks and the crowd began to disperse, Nathan Kamaka approached them privately. The retired detective embraced each family member, his eyes damp with emotion. I made a promise to you and to Leilani, he told them quietly. I'm grateful I lived to see it fulfilled. The conviction of Kai Nakamura reverberated beyond Hawaii's shores. Major news networks covered the story as an example of how forensic genealogy was revolutionizing cold case investigations nationwide. Legal experts debated the privacy implications of the technology, while victims' advocacy groups praised its ability to bring closure to families who had waited years for answers. In Hilo and Keaukaha, the community began the slow process of healing. The surf school, once owned by Nakamura, was purchased by a local family who renamed it and dedicated a portion of its proceeds to marine conservation in Leilani's memory. Beaches that had carried an unspoken shadow for 13 years felt lighter, safer, as if a hidden threat had finally been removed from the paradise residents cherished. At the University of Hawaii, the Marine Biology Department established the annual Leilani Akana lecture series, bringing prominent researchers to discuss coral conservation and climate change impacts on reef ecosystems. The first lecture, held 6 months after Nakamura's conviction, filled the university auditorium to capacity. Dr. James Kwan, now department chair, introduced the series with a touching tribute to his former colleague. Leilani believed that knowledge was our greatest tool in protecting Hawaii's marine treasures, he told the audience. She would be proud to see her work continuing through new generations of scientists committed to preserving what she loved. In the front row, Keone listened intently, now a freshman marine biology major at the university. Beside him sat his grandparents, aunt and father, together as they had been throughout the ordeal. For Keone, the lecture series represented a connection to the mother he had lost, not through the tragedy of her death, but through the passion and purpose of her life. The most profound change came in how law enforcement approached cold cases throughout Hawaii. Inspired by the Akana case, the state legislature increased funding for forensic genealogy, creating a specialized unit dedicated to reviewing unsolved murders and sexual assaults. Within 18 months, the unit had solved 4 additional cold cases, bringing closure to families who had waited years for answers. Dr. Lisa Wong, whose testimony had been crucial in Nakamura's conviction, became the director of this new unit. In a speech at its launch, she held up the Akana case as an example of persistence paying off. DNA evidence doesn't degrade like memories or alibis, she explained. It waits patiently for science to catch up, for someone to ask the right questions. For Nathan Kamaka, the resolution of the case that had defined much of his career brought a sense of completion. Though officially retired, he continued to consult on cold cases, sharing his experience with younger detectives. His office at home featured a wall of photos, families reunited with lost loved ones, victims who had received justice, communities healed through truth. Among them, prominently displayed, was a picture of Leilani Akana with her young son, their smiles preserved in a moment before tragedy struck. On the anniversary of Nakamura's conviction, the Akana family held a different kind of gathering at Richardson Beach Park. Instead of a somber memorial, they organized a celebration of life and science, an educational day featuring marine biology demonstrations, reef conservation information, and cultural activities highlighting the connection between Hawaiian traditions and environmental stewardship. Hundreds attended, many wearing T-shirts bearing the logo of the Leilani Akana Foundation for Marine Conservation. Children peered into touch tanks containing harmless reef creatures. University students demonstrated water quality testing techniques. And cultural practitioners shared traditional Hawaiian practices for sustainable fishing and ocean protection. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the black sand beach, Gerald and Malina Akana stood with their grandson at the water's edge. Keone, now completing his freshman year and already involved in promising research on coral resilience, looked out at the ocean his mother had loved. "I used to come here and feel only loss," he said softly. "Now I feel her presence in every wave, every creature, every breath of salt air. She's not gone, she's part of everything I'm working to protect." His grandmother squeezed his hand, tears glinting in the dying light. "She would be so proud of the man you've become," she told him, "and of how you've transformed her story from one of tragedy to one of inspiration." As darkness fell, attendees lit floating lanterns and placed them gently on the water, not in mourning, but in celebration of a life that continued to illuminate others. The tiny lights drifted outward, casting warm glows against the darkening Pacific, symbols of how a single life could continue to guide and inspire long after its physical presence had ended. In his Halawa Correctional Facility cell, Kai Nakamura received news of the gathering through a newspaper article. The paper included a photo of Keone speaking to a group of young students about coral conservation, his resemblance to his mother unmistakable. Guards reported that Nakamura stared at the image for a long time before carefully folding the paper and placing it under his mattress. His first acknowledgement, however silent, of the life he had taken and the legacy that had survived his violence. For the residents of Hilo and Kaukaha, the Akana case represented more than just the resolution of a tragic crime. It demonstrated the power of persistence, the evolution of science in service of justice, and the resilience of a community determined to reclaim its sense of safety and trust. Where once they had locked doors and cast suspicious glances at neighbors, they now organized beach cleanups, supported marine research programs, and celebrated the interconnection that defined island life. At the Hawaii County Police Department, a framed photograph of Leilani now hung in the cold case unit, alongside a simple plaque that read, "Justice has no expiration date." New detectives learned about the case during their training, studying how traditional investigative methods combined with cutting-edge science had finally brought truth to light. Malia, who had discovered her sister's body that terrible morning in 2006, found herself increasingly called upon to speak to victims' families facing similar circumstances. With compassion born from her own experience, she offered them what she had learned through 13 years of waiting. Hope is not foolish. Truth does not fade, and those who seek justice must never surrender to time. The most lasting impact, however, was embodied in Keone Akana, who carried forward not only his mother's name, but her passion and purpose. In the university research lab where he worked alongside Dr. Kwan, Keone developed new methods for monitoring coral health that expanded upon Leilani's original research. His first published paper, examining the resilience of native Hawaiian coral species to rising ocean temperatures, was dedicated to my mother, whose work continues through my hands. On a quiet morning near the anniversary of the verdict, Keone visited his mother's memorial plaque alone. He placed a small piece of healthy coral in a water-filled container beside it, a specimen from a reef his mother had been studying when she died, now thriving due to conservation measures she had helped pioneer. "We did it, Mom," he said softly to the bronze image of the woman he had never really known, but had come to understand through her work and legacy. "We found the truth. We protected what you loved. And we're still going, still learning, still fighting for these waters." As Keone stood there, the morning sun breaking through clouds to illuminate the plaque and the healthy coral beside it, a family of tourists approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude on his moment. Their young daughter, perhaps 7 or 8, peered curiously at the container of coral. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to the vibrant formation. Keone smiled, bending down to her level. "This is called Porites labata, a type of coral that grows in our reefs. Would you like to know more about it?" The girl nodded eagerly, and as her parents watched, Keone began explaining how coral formed, how it created homes for countless marine creatures, and why protecting it mattered for the future of the oceans. His eyes lit up with the same passion that had driven his mother's research, the enthusiasm infectious as the child asked question after question. In that moment, as knowledge passed from one generation to the next under the watchful bronze gaze of Leilani Akana, the true meaning of justice came full circle. A life had been taken, but a legacy continued, not just in solved cases and convicted killers, but in protected reefs, inspired students, and a community that had reclaimed its connection to the land, sea, and each other. The story of Leilani Akana and the long path to identifying her killer would be told for years to come across the Hawaiian Islands, not as a tale of tragedy and loss, but as a testament to the enduring power of truth, the evolution of science in service of justice, and the unbreakable bonds of family and community that refuse to let memory fade into silence. As the young family thanked Keone and continued their walk along the beach, he remained by the plaque for a moment longer. A gentle trade wind carried the scent of plumeria and salt water, and somewhere in the distance, the distinctive splash of a humpback whale. A breaching the surface echoed across the bay, nature's own tribute to a scientist who had dedicated her life to understanding and protecting Hawaii's marine treasures. For Keone, for the Akana family, and for the community of Hilo, the journey had been long and painful, but the destination, truth, justice, and healing, had proved worth every difficult step. In solving one of Hawaii's most haunting cold cases, they had not only captured a killer, but reclaimed the narrative of their community, transforming a story of violence and loss into one of resilience, science, and the unbreakable human spirit. The Akana case became a landmark in Hawaii's legal history, referenced in law schools across the state and beyond. Professors used it to illustrate the evolution of forensic science and its impact on cold case investigations. At the William S. Richardson School of Law in Honolulu, a seminar on DNA evidence and privacy in the digital age devoted an entire section to examining how the Nakamura conviction had set precedent for future cases involving forensic genealogy. 5 years after the conviction in 2025, Dr. Lisa Wong published a comprehensive paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences detailing the methodologies used in the Akana case. The article, titled "From Cold Case to Conviction: Forensic Genealogy in the Hawaiian Islands," became required reading for criminal justice students nationwide. In it, Wong emphasized the meticulous preservation of evidence by the original investigators as the critical factor that allowed for later technological breakthroughs. Without the careful collection and storage procedures implemented in 2006, she wrote, the DNA evidence that ultimately solved this case would have degraded beyond use. Future investigators should view every unmatched DNA sample not as a dead end, but as potential evidence awaiting technological advancement. For the Hawaii County Police Department, the success of the Akana case led to a complete overhaul of their cold case procedures. A dedicated unit was established with specialized training in both traditional investigative techniques and cutting-edge forensic methods. Detective Elena Pukui, who had assisted in Nakamura's arrest, became the unit's first supervisor, bringing both fresh perspective and institutional knowledge to the role. Under Pukui's leadership, the unit began systematically reviewing dozens of unsolved homicides dating back to the 1970s, prioritizing cases with preserved biological evidence. Within the first 3 years, they resolved 7 additional cold cases, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. The Akana case taught us to never give up hope, Pukui told a conference of Pacific law enforcement agencies in 2027. Every case deserves the same dedication, the same persistence, regardless of how long it's been cold. Time is no longer the criminal's greatest ally. For Nathan Kamaka, the years following Nakamura's conviction brought a quieter but equally meaningful form of closure. Though he had officially retired, he continued to mentor younger detectives and consult on particularly challenging cases. His reputation as the detective who never forgot Leilani Akana made him a respected figure in law enforcement circles throughout Hawaii. In 2026, at a ceremony marking 20 years since Leilani's death, Kamaka was honored with the Hawaii County Distinguished Service Medal for his decades of dedication. As he stood to accept the award, the entire audience rose in standing ovation. Uniformed officers, public officials, and most movingly, the Akana family standing front and center. A detective's greatest responsibility is to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves, Kamaka said in his acceptance speech. Leilani Akana was not just a case number or a file on my desk. She was a brilliant scientist, a loving mother, a daughter and sister, remembering that humanity is what drove me to keep searching for answers even when others had given up hope. Later that evening, at a private gathering with the Akana family, Kamaka shared something he had never before revealed. From his wallet, he removed a worn photograph of Leilani and Keone taken at a beach cleanup event shortly before her death. "I carried this every day for 20 years, he told them quietly. It reminded me that behind every case file is a real person, a real family waiting for answers. Gerald and Leilani Akana, now in their 70s, but still active in the foundation bearing their daughter's name, embraced the detective who had become like family through their shared journey toward justice. "You brought our daughter back to us in the only way possible," Gerald said, voice thick with emotion. "You gave us the truth, and with it, the chance to heal." For Keone Akana, now 24 and completing his doctorate in marine biology, the resolution of his mother's case had provided the foundation upon which he built his adult life. Free from the shadows of uncertainty and unanswered questions that had colored his childhood, he had blossomed into a promising young scientist whose work directly extended his mother's legacy. In 2027, Keone led a groundbreaking research project examining the recovery rates of coral reefs in protected Hawaiian waters versus those in unprotected areas. The study, published in Nature and cited widely in conservation circles, built directly upon baseline data his mother had collected 2 decades earlier. For the scientific community, it represented a rare longitudinal study spanning generations of researchers. For Keone, it was a collaboration with the mother he had lost, but found again through her work. At the university's Marine Research Station at Coconut Island, the same location where his mother had conducted much of her research, Keone established the Leilani Akana Fellowship for young women pursuing careers in marine science. The first recipient, a promising undergraduate named Alana Yoshida, reminded many of Leilani herself, brilliant, passionate, and deeply committed to protecting Hawaii's fragile marine ecosystems. "I never knew Dr. Akana," Alana said at the fellowship announcement ceremony, "but through her research papers, her foundation's work, and the stories of those who knew her, I feel her influence every day. It's an honor to carry forward a small part of her legacy." As Keone listened to the young student speak, he felt a sense of completion that transcended the legal closure provided by Nakamura's conviction. His mother's work, her passion, her values, continued not just through him, but through generations of scientists inspired by her contributions and her story. In the wider community of Hilo and Keaukaha, the long-term impact of the Akana case manifested in both practical and symbolic ways. The annual Leilani Akana Day of Marine Conservation grew from a local memorial event to an island-wide educational initiative, with schools throughout Hawaii County participating in beach cleanups, reef surveys, and marine education programs. Local dive shops and tour operators, once competitors with Nakamura's surf school, collaborated to develop a code of conduct for marine recreation businesses, emphasizing protection of the very ecosystems that drew visitors to Hawaii's shores. Many prominently displayed the Leilani Akana Foundation logo in their windows, with a percentage of their profits supporting reef conservation efforts. For Malia Kealoha, who had discovered her sister's body that terrible morning in 2006, the years following Nakamura's conviction brought both healing and purpose. Her initial reluctance to speak publicly about the case gradually transformed into a powerful advocacy role, as she became a voice for families of victims waiting for answers in cold cases. In partnership with the Hawaii County Police Department, Malia established a support network for these families, offering both emotional support and practical guidance in navigating the complex and often frustrating criminal justice system. Twice monthly, the group met in a community center in Hilo, where Malia's compassion and first-hand experience provided comfort to those still waiting for the closure she had finally found. "The worst part of losing someone to violence is not knowing," Malia often told these families. not knowing who or why or if they'll ever be held accountable. I lived in that uncertainty for 13 years, and I know how it tears at your heart every day. But I also know that answers can come, even decades later, if we refuse to let the world forget. Her advocacy extended beyond emotional support to practical action. Working with Dr. Wong's forensic team, Malia helped establish a program allowing families of cold case victims to receive annual updates on their cases, including information about new technologies or methodologies that might eventually lead to breakthroughs. For Gerald and Leilani Akana, now in the twilight of their lives, the years following Nakamura's conviction brought a peace they had once thought impossible. While nothing could erase the loss of their daughter, knowing the truth about her death had allowed them to refocus their energy on celebrating her life and continuing her work through the foundation they had established. In 2028, as the Leilani Akana Foundation for Marine Conservation prepared to mark its 15th anniversary, Gerald suffered a severe stroke. For weeks, he lay in Hilo Medical Center, his condition gradually stabilizing, but his recovery uncertain. Throughout his hospitalization, a steady stream of visitors filled his room, family members, of course, but also police officers, researchers who had benefited from foundation grants, and community members whose lives had been touched by the Akana family's perseverance. Among these visitors was Daniel Reed, a fisherman whose small boat had been caught in a sudden storm off the Hilo coast in 2025. The emergency beacon developed through a foundation-funded research project had saved his life, allowing rescuers to locate him despite heavy seas and limited visibility. Reed had never met Gerald before, but had asked to express his gratitude in person. "Because of your daughter's work and what you've done to continue it, I'm still here," Reed told the elderly man, clasping his hand. "My kids still have their father. Some good had to come from all that pain, and it has. More than you might ever know." Such moments reinforced for the Akana family that their daughter's legacy extended far beyond the tragic circumstances of her death. While the legal case had dominated their lives for years, the true meaning of justice lay not just in Nakamura's conviction, but in the positive impact Leilani's work continued to have on the islands she had loved. As Gerald slowly recovered, the foundation announced its most ambitious project yet, the creation of the Leilani Akana Center for Marine Research and Conservation, a state-of-the-art facility to be built adjacent to the University of Hawaii's Hilo campus. The center would house laboratories, classrooms, and public education spaces, serving as both a research hub and a community resource. Funding came from diverse sources: state grants, university partnerships, private donations, and most significantly, a major contribution from Marcus Akana, Leilani's ex-husband, who had built a successful hotel management company in the years following her death. Though their marriage had ended before tragedy struck, Marcus had remained connected to the family through their shared commitment to raising Keone and honoring Leilani's memory. "Keone has shown me what his mother's work truly meant," Marcus explained at the groundbreaking ceremony in 2029. "Supporting this center is the best way I know to ensure that work continues for generations to come." As construction began on the center, another significant development occurred in the legal aftermath of the Akana case. After 9 years of appeals, the Hawaii Supreme Court issued a final ruling on Nakamura's conviction, unanimously affirming both the guilty verdict and the constitutionality of the forensic genealogy methods used to identify him. The court's written opinion, authored by Chief Justice Leilani Akana, established clear guidelines for the use of forensic genealogy in criminal investigations, balancing privacy concerns with the state's interest in solving serious crimes. The ruling cited the Akana case as exemplifying both the transformative potential of the technology and the careful procedural safeguards necessary for its ethical application. While DNA databases create novel questions regarding privacy, Justice Nakamura wrote, "The state's compelling interest in solving violent crimes, particularly those that have remained unsolved for extended periods, justifies their careful and regulated use. The resolution of the Akana murder demonstrates how such technology, properly applied, serves not only the interests of justice, but also the healing of communities affected by unsolved violent crimes." Legal scholars noted that this ruling, while specific to Hawaii, would likely influence similar cases throughout the United States as more states incorporated forensic genealogy into their investigative toolkits. The Akana standard, as it came to be known in legal circles, provided a framework for balancing technological advancement with constitutional protections. At Hilo Correctional Facility, where he continued to serve his life sentence without possibility of parole, Kai Nakamura learned of the Supreme Court's ruling through a prison newspaper. Now in his 50s, he had maintained his innocence through years of appeals, despite the overwhelming DNA evidence and the jury's unequivocal finding of guilt. In 2030, however, something unexpected occurred. After 14 years of imprisonment and exhausting all legal appeals, Nakamura requested a meeting with the Akana family. Such requests from convicted murderers to their victims' families were unusual and generally discouraged by prison authorities. In this case, however, after consultation with prison psychologists who had been working with Nakamura, the request was forwarded to the family. The decision of whether to meet with the man convicted of killing Leilani created profound division within the Akana family. Malia and Gerald adamantly opposed any contact, seeing it as potentially re-traumatizing and offering no benefit. Melina, however, expressed a tentative willingness to hear what Nakamura might have to say, believing it might provide additional closure. The most surprising response came from Keone, now 28 and an established researcher in his own right. "I want to look him in the eye," he told his family during an intense discussion at his grandparents' home. "Not for his sake, but for mine. I've spent my entire life in the shadow of what he did. I need to see him as he really is. Just a man, not the monster from my childhood nightmares." After weeks of family discussions and consultations with victim advocates and therapists, a decision was reached. Keone and Melina would meet with Nakamura, while Malia and Gerald would not. The meeting would take place in a secure room at the prison, with counselors present and strict time limitations enforced. On an overcast morning in April 2030, Keone and his grandmother arrived at Hilo Correctional Facility, both nervous but resolute in their decision. They were escorted to a small, plainly furnished room, where two guards stood watch near the door. After a few minutes of waiting, Kai Nakamura was brought in, wearing standard prison attire, his once athletic frame now thinner, his black hair streaked with grey. For several long moments no one spoke. Keone stared at the man whose actions had altered the entire trajectory of his life, trying to reconcile the aging prisoner before him with the shadowy figure who had haunted his imagination since childhood. Nakamura, for his part, seemed unable to meet Keone's gaze directly, his eyes flicking between the young man, Melina, and the floor. Finally, Nakamura broke the silence. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse and quiet. "I didn't expect you would." "Why did you ask to see us?" Melina asked directly, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Nakamura took a deep breath. "After all these years of denials, all the appeals, all the fighting the evidence, I wanted to tell you both that I'm sorry. I did kill Leilani. I finally admitted it to myself, and now I'm admitting it to you." The confession, delivered without drama or qualification, hung in the air between them. After 14 years of steadfast denials, Nakamura had finally acknowledged what the DNA evidence had proven beyond any doubt, that he was responsible for Leilani's death. "Why?" Keone asked, the single word carrying the weight of a lifetime of questions. "Why my mother?" Nakamura's explanation, halting and at times barely coherent, painted a picture of obsession that had begun when he first encountered Leilani during her research dives near his surf school. Her intelligence, beauty, and complete lack of interest in him had triggered something dark within him, a need to possess what he could not have through normal means. He described following her, watching her work, creating reasons to encounter her that seemed coincidental. When she firmly rejected his advances during their confrontation at Coconut Island, the argument witnessed by William Kanahele, his obsession had curdled into rage. On the night of June 8, 2006, he had gone to her cottage, ostensibly to apologize, but actually hoping to persuade her to reconsider his romantic interest. When she again rejected him and threatened to report his harassment to the police, he had lost control, attacking her in a fury that ended with her death. Throughout this confession, Keone and Melina remained silent, allowing Nakamura to speak without interruption. When he finally finished, Keone leaned forward, his expression controlled, despite the turmoil he must have felt. "Do you know what you took from me?" he asked quietly. "Not just my mother, but my chance to know her, to learn from her, to have memories of her." "I can't undo what I did," Nakamura replied, his voice breaking. "I know that. I've spent 14 years trying to deny it, to myself and to everyone else. But I can't escape the truth anymore, and neither should you have to live without it." Melina, who had remained composed throughout the confession, finally spoke again. "Why now, after all these years of denials? What changed?" Nakamura explained that years of therapy in prison had gradually broken through his layers of denial and self-deception. A recent health scare, a heart condition requiring surgery, had forced him to confront his own mortality and the legacy he would leave behind. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve it. But I thought you deserved to hear the truth directly from me, not just from DNA evidence and court testimonies." After nearly an hour, the meeting concluded. As they prepared to leave, Keone addressed Nakamura one final time. "My mother believed in truth above all else," he said. "In her research, in her life, she never accepted comfortable lies over uncomfortable facts. In that one small way, I think she would appreciate what you've done today." As they left the prison, Keone and Melina walked in silence to their car. Only when they were driving away from the facility did Melina ask her grandson how he felt about what they had heard. "I don't feel closure," Keone replied thoughtfully. "I'm not sure that exists for something like this. But I feel unburdened somehow, like I've been carrying not just grief, but questions for my entire life. Now at least some of those questions have answers." Indeed. When they shared Nakamura's confession with the rest of the family, reactions were mixed. Gerald, still recovering from his stroke, seemed unmoved by the admission, saying simply, "We already knew the truth." His words changed nothing. Malia acknowledged that the confession might help some family members, but maintained that she had no desire to ever see or hear from Nakamura. For the broader community, however, Nakamura's confession represented a final confirmation of what the evidence had proven years earlier. The Hawaii Tribune-Herald ran a brief article about the development, noting that it marked the final chapter in one of Hawaii County's most notorious cold cases. As 2030 drew to a close, the Leilani Akana Center for Marine Research and Conservation neared completion on its hillside site overlooking Hilo Bay. The modern facility, with its sweeping glass facades and green roof planted with native Hawaiian species, was designed to embody the integration of cutting-edge science with traditional Hawaiian values of environmental stewardship. At the center's dedication ceremony in January 2031, 25 years after Leilani's death, hundreds gathered to celebrate not just the new facility, but the remarkable journey that had led to its creation. University officials, state politicians, environmental activists and community members joined the Akana family for the emotional event. Dr. James Kwan, now emeritus professor of marine biology, spoke of Leilani's pioneering research and its continued relevance in an era of climate change and ocean acidification. Nakamura, himself now elderly but still sharp, described the investigation that had spanned more than a decade and transformed cold case procedures throughout Hawaii. Dr. Lisa Wong detailed how the forensic genealogy techniques first employed in the Akana case had since helped solve dozens of cold cases across the Pacific. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, Leilani Akana took the podium, surveying the assembled crowd with a quiet confidence that reminded many of his mother. Now a respected researcher in his own right, and newly appointed as the center's first director, he embodied the living legacy of Leilani's work and passion. 25 years ago, violence took my mother's life, but it could not take her legacy, he began, his voice clear and strong. That legacy lives on in the reefs she fought to protect, in the research she pioneered, in the lives she touched, and now in this center that bears her name. He gestured toward the gleaming new building behind him, then continued. But the true measure of my mother's legacy isn't found in buildings or plaques or even in scientific papers. It's found in how we choose to continue her work, protecting these islands and waters she loved, pursuing truth no matter how elusive it may seem, and never giving up hope that justice and healing are possible, even when the path is long and difficult. As Leilani concluded his remarks, Gerald and Leilani Akana joined him at the podium, followed by Malia and Marcus. Together, they cut the ceremonial male lei stretched across the center's entrance, officially opening the facility that would carry Leilani's work and name into the future. Among the many photographs taken that day, one would become particularly symbolic of the Akana family's journey. It showed 4 generations standing together, Gerald and Leilani, now in their late 70s, Malia and Marcus in their 60s, Leilani at 28, and most poignantly, Leilani's infant daughter, born just 3 months earlier and named Leilani in honor of the grandmother she would know only through stories, scientific papers, and the enduring legacy of a life cut short but never forgotten. As visitors filed through the center for the first time, exploring exhibits on coral reef ecology, climate change impacts, and traditional Hawaiian marine resource management, many paused at a simple display near the entrance. There, a photograph of the original Leilani Akana stood beside a quote from her final published paper. "The ocean connects us all, to each other, to our past, and to the future we create through our actions today." In those words, and in the center that now carried them forward, the long journey from tragedy to justice to legacy had found its fullest expression, not in courts or prison cells, but in the continuing work of protecting the natural world that Leilani had loved and the community that had never forgotten her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.